Hey nerds, what's up? Today I'm going to talk about how Piranesi by Susanna Clarke forced me to do a video on it. See you after the jump. So if you follow me on my Instagram account, you'll know that I read way more books than I ever actually review on my YouTube channel. And the reason for that is I usually save my book reviews for books that I know are either extremely popular or books that I have a more unique take on, or I want to talk about something specific in them and not just reviews in general. So when I picked up Piranesi to read it, I was never planning on making a video about it. I had always been interested in reading this book eventually because I really liked Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norwell, and if you saw my slow burn video on that, you'll see that I really enjoyed it, but it was a slow burn. It was a very long book, it had a lot of slow moments in it, and 2020 was just kind of a hard year, and I just didn't know if I was in the mood for that kind of slow burn book where I have to spend a lot of time really digging into it. But then I saw Piranesi at the bookstore and I saw that it was actually a very short book. So my interest was piqued and I kind of wanted to read it more, but I had this big TBR, so yada yada yada. Eventually, Read by Andy's Discord channel, which is a great Discord by the way, I'll link that all down below, decided to do a buddy read of Piranesi this month. And I was like, this is my perfect opportunity. I love a good buddy read. I'm just gonna jump in and read this. And then I sat down and read this book in under 24 hours. It's that book. It is that book. I haven't read a book in 2021 yet that blew me out of the water. I've read a lot of books that I really enjoyed, that I gave 4 stars to, but nothing just like gripped me from the very beginning and blew me out of the water, made me think this book is gonna be a contender for my top books of the year. Until this one. This is that book. 5 stars, definite contender for my top books of the year at the end of the year. Like, it shocked me. Now, I'm really grateful I knew nothing about this book going into it. I think the less you know about this book, the better. I tend to buy books without even reading the synopsis or the cover or reading any reviews, so I knew nothing about what this was about, and I think that was perfect. So if you haven't read this yet, I will just give you a quick overview. It's a wonderful book. It's mysterious. It's unique. It may be a little polarizing, but I would give it a try. But if you haven't read it, I would turn off this video now and come back after you've read it because I am going to just talk about it in a spoilery terms because it's kind of necessary to do that. It's pretty hard to talk about this book without giving a little bit away, and I think if you don't know anything about it, that's the best way to go into this book. What Clarke really succeeds in writing this book is writing an unreliable narrator. Now, I have always loved an unreliable narrator since I was an early teen, and I thought Catcher in the Rye was my favorite book because I identified, but yeah, you know, angsty teen. But I loved that unreliable narrator and I've loved them since. And Clarke just does such a good job of slowly weaving in clues throughout the story that our narrator is unreliable, but not until we need to know that. And I think just the way she does it was so unique. It wasn't just like a all of a sudden moment. It was a slow build up to understanding why and how our narrator Piranesi was unreliable and what they did and didn't know. Right from the first page, I was hooked. It was talking about this world that was made completely of marble and statues. And I was like, well, the whole world can't just be this. Like, wait, are we on a different planet? Or is just someone who doesn't understand that this isn't their whole world? But then I was like, well, maybe it's a fantasy world. I just had so many questions from the first page. And it actually surprises me that the main complaint I've read about this book is they felt that it started off very slowly and they didn't know what was going on for the first bit of it. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that later. But I disagree. Like, I was immediately captivated by this interesting world. Additionally, even though I didn't know what was going on, like, I agree, like, it was a confusing book. I was like, what's happening? I started noticing clues pretty early on, like as early as page 9 or 14. So that helped me understand that there was a bigger mystery. I'm actually going to talk about some of my favorite clues, the ones that I noticed right away. The first thing I actually didn't realize was a clue. It was on page 9, and it's when Piranesi talks about meeting twice a week on Tuesdays and Fridays. And I was like, this is kind of weird. They have their own calendar system, but he's still calling his weekdays the same things we do. And the foolish part of me was like, this isn't very good world building. Like, Clarke didn't pay attention to details, which it's mind-blowing that I thought that about her because I read Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, which was like the most detailed book ever. But I wasn't reading it with the idea that it was a mystery because I didn't know. And so I was like, oh, that kind of took me out a little bit. So then it goes on, and on page 13, it talks about how he used to label his dates from 2011 to 2012, and then he started changing his dates. And this is the first time I was like, okay, something's happened. Something's happened. him and the other must be trapped here, and he's just forgotten why. So I just feel like page 13 isn't that long to go before you realize something's up. And immediately when I saw this, she was giving us the clue, like, something is up. And then the biggest one that really annoyed me was when he knew what chess was. So I was like, this was on page 16, he talks about the statue that's playing chess. And I was like, this person lives in an all marble place. How would they know what chess was? They've never played it before. So again, I was kind of halfway between like, is Clarke just being messy? But then all of a sudden being like, wait a second, something's happening here clearly. And I couldn't find the exact moment, but they also talk a lot about the other suits. And I'm like, well, why is he in a suit? So like there were plenty of clues. I feel like people who feel like it just came out of nowhere, I just didn't feel that way. I felt like I loved all the clues she left us. And I also love how it talks about on page 21 his device, but it doesn't give us clues yet to that. So I thought it was just some random device the other had made out of like seaweed or whatever, because like Piranesi's kind of weird. So I also love that she holds the screen part back till later when we already suspect the other. Ugh, her clue work was masterful. Those are the only ones I'm gonna read, but I think the clues were there and I think they were sprinkled in such a natural way that it is confusing. You're not sure if Clarke is like a bad writer or if she's doing it intentionally, and as you go on, it becomes very intentional, and I really loved that. The other part I really loved about this book was how she was able to hold back just enough information about the other, or also known as Ketterly, to slowly change our opinion of him throughout the book. Like when I first started the book, I thought he was like Piranesi, so I thought he was like a scientist and he thought this was all the world. As we go a little further, we realize, okay, the other knows more. So I thought he must know that they're trapped in this world and he's trying to help them both get out, but Piranesi doesn't really understand, kind of like a big brother, little brother thing. And then as it goes on, you're like, oh, Ketterly can get out, so he's kind of using Piranesi, but he loves Piranesi. He's using kind of the native of this world to help them understand. And then obviously it keeps devolving to you're like, oh, Ketterly, you're a villain. And I like that our opinion changes so slowly. Like she was able to purposefully change my perspective with each new piece of information she gave me. And it was this slow movement rather than all at once, oh, we thought he was good and now he's bad. And I think that's so much more masterful that my opinion was constantly changing about Ketterly, not just like bam, one piece of information and then it did. And I think that was very difficult to do. And it was one of my favorite parts of this, that I get to feel like Piranesi and that we get to evolve with him as he learns new information. I don't even know how to describe how that pulled me in and why it made me read this so fast and made me feel so invested in these characters. I also love that we have a super mysterious magic system in this book. It's very soft magic system, but I think she does just the perfect amount of explanation. The problem with soft magic systems is they can't have too much explanation or it kind of ruins it and makes things break down, but if it has too little, you feel like just strange things are happening and there's not enough explanation. She really found the perfect blend of that, where I understood what was happening, I understood what our characters were searching for, I got this whole other world thing, but I didn't need it to be over-explained. That wasn't the center part. I don't know. It's just so brilliant. And it's cool that it's a complete 180 from Jonathan Strange, where that was like, everything was like a history book. Everything was perfectly explained with footnotes and very in-depth. And to show her range that she can do something completely different than that and still have it be successful attests to her prowess as an author. I also found myself weirdly attached to these characters. I know we didn't have a lot of time to spend with them, and I've seen some criticism that people felt pretty detached from the characters, but I personally felt the opposite. I really was rooting for everybody. I felt like I understood everybody's character motivations, and I really liked Raphael. She was a very late addition to the story, but I loved how she was kind of like the typical cop who's going to the end to save people, but I liked how she didn't force Matthew to come out. I just felt like she had a very sweet personality, and it was a nice contrast to the other personalities that we saw who were very ruthless, and I liked how she felt very connected to the world too, and Raphael and Matthew could connect over that. It was so well done, guys. I can't stop obsessing over this book. I loved it so much. And as I was reading it, I was really worried it was one of those books where the mystery was the best part and the ending wouldn't live up to it. But I thought it had a perfect ending. It ended just the way it needed to. And I don't know, guys. I just love this book. So the biggest criticism I've read about this book, like I mentioned before, is that people are frustrated that it feels that it starts very slow and they didn't know what was happening, and they felt like none of the plot really started to about 40 pages in, which is like a decent chunk of a short book. about a quarter, I think they were complaining. I think this criticism has a lot to do with your reading history. So I think most of my subscribers tend to be very big high fantasy readers, since that's mostly what I cover on this channel. And if you're a high fantasy reader, like 40 pages where nothing happens, that's just every day for us. Like Wheel of Time is talking, Malazan is talking, Joey Abercrombie even is talking. Like, we're used to having to stick with a book through a lot of pages before something significant happens, and I think that's something I've just become accustomed to, so that didn't bother me. But additionally, if you're a huge Sanderson fan, I personally feel like Sanderson has trained me to be a clue looker. Like, ever since I've really gotten invested in the Cosmere, all of a sudden, the ability I have to pick through everything he says in those books has come over to my other reading. So maybe if you weren't used to a fantasy book where you're trying to pick out clues, you may not have picked up the clues I picked up early on. And so I wonder if you're coming at this from someone who reads more just like regular adult fantasy or maybe literary fiction and not from that high fantasy background. I can understand this criticism. I think it's a valid criticism based on your reading history. But for me, and just like as an explanation for those who maybe read a lot of high fantasy, I don't think that part will bother you. Although if you're watching this, you've probably already read it. So I guess I should have said this before the spoiler jump. Whatever, I'll keep it in. So I'd love to know what you think about Piranesi. I think it may be a polarizing book because it is very strange. It's nothing like I've ever read before, which is what made me immediately fall in love with it. I'm so obsessed with it. Please let me know in the comments. It's okay if you don't like it. I just want to know why. Let's discuss it down below. Let me know what you think. I think next time Clarke releases a book, I will be the first in line to buy it because at this point, I feel like she's been very proven to me. So I'm very, very excited about that. And if you want to support me, please subscribe. That is the best way you can support me. And if you want to see what I'm currently reading, you can check me out on Instagram at bookborn.reviews. I also will sometimes do stories about other nerd things on there that I don't talk about on my channel. For example, I did a huge discussion about WandaVision that was very unpopular. So if you want to see my opinion on some other nerd stuff, you can check me out on Instagram. I'll see you next time. Bye.